Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Sound Tracker, and I wanted to talk to you about the RCA Capacitance Electronic Video Disc System, or CED for short. Mainly because, it's just so bizarre. They're essentially a record that can play movies. How strange is that? So a minute ago I classified these things as records that play movies, and that's more or less what they are, but still not entirely appropriate, based on how they operate. It's really easier to show you about it, so let me take you over here. With a conventional record, sound is etched in a spiral around the disc. A stylus tracks along with the groove at usually 33 revolutions per minute, and picks up sound based on the vibrations of the needle, which is then amplified by the rest of the stereo. With a CED, the only similarity is that it's read by a stylus. In order to fit all of the video information onto the disc, the grooves are packed together incredibly close, and the disc has to spin a lot faster, around 450 revolutions per minute. On top of that, the disc itself isn't necessarily vinyl. It's actually a PVC plastic with carbon mixed in, and this is to make the disc conductive. It has to be conductive because the stylus reading the groove is creating an electrical video signal from it. So it's not just regular sound waves like a conventional record. It's a very interesting bit of engineering, and I'm really impressed with it. So you might be wondering, why was this thing even made? And from what I can find out from various sources, it started development sometime back in 1964 and was supposed to be exactly what you'd expect. It's a record that plays a movie. And through a lot of poor planning though, it had a lot of setbacks, it had manufacturer delays, and it didn't actually get released until round about 1981. It was supposed to be a more affordable way to watch movies, with players and films costing less than that of a VHS at the time. But it ended up being discontinued in 1984, and they stopped supporting the movies for it in 1986. What that means for us, though, is that we get a lot of good films that were released on this format. We have things like Ghostbusters, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, the making of Michael Jackson's Thriller, The Godfather, First Blood, the first Rambo movie, a lot of the James Bond series, the Blues Brothers, the first Indiana Jones movie, the entire Star Wars trilogy, War Games, the first Alien movie, Dr. Detroit, Young Frankenstein, and an absolute ton more than that. So, there's a lot of great films out there on this format, but let's start by getting a little bit more technical. Now, if you're looking for a CED, chances are you're going to see one of two types. One is in a white caddy, and the other is in a blue caddy. This is meant to differentiate between the kinds of sound that were available at the time. If you had a mono television, you'd only be able to hear sound through one speaker. To market to those people, the white caddies have a monophonic soundtrack and are able to play in both stereo and mono machines. Most TVs today have a stereophonic sound where we use 2 speakers instead of 1. And this is where the blue caddies come in. These are made to be used optimally in stereo machines for stereo sound, but will be compatible with mono machines as well. Towards the end of the production line though, they started getting a little bit lazy, so you're going to find a couple of discs like this, where a blue stereo caddy will still have a white mono insert. I do still believe that these are their respective stereo and mono copies though, even if the insert doesn't match. Each of these discs are able to hold 60 minutes of video per side, so as long as a movie is under 2 hours, it's generally going to be on one disc. But if it's longer, they still end up getting split across 2 discs. So if you're looking for discs, make sure that they have an indication of whether or not they have a part 1 or a part 2, kinda like this. Now, I realize it's a bit weird to say that there are 2 types of caddies with 2 types of soundtracks, one for mono, the other for stereo, that still both work with each other. But I think it's a little easier to clear up by showing you the players. In the United States, there were a few variations of players, one of which I can't demonstrate because I don't have it. The ones that I do have though are these, an off-brand variation made by Realistic, and another that was higher up the range for RCA. Starting with the Realistic player model CED1, you have the usual controls for a CED player: play and pause, 2 speeds of fast forward, 2 speeds of rewind, and return, which moves the stylus back into its rest position so you can get the disc out. I like that it has side indicators to tell if you're watching side A or side B of a disc. It's a really nice touch. There's also a time indicator here which travels along with the stylus. It's supposed to have a light inside of it, but mine is busted and I don't know how to fix it. Let's get this thing open, because honestly, it's a lot more interesting to see in action anyways. This particular player is really interesting in that it's almost fully automatic for loading a disc. There's no power button, no need to tell it to do anything, just put in the disc and it's already off and running. The needle starts moving into the play position, and when it drops down, you're greeted with this. I was kinda curious to see how fast forward and rewind look when they're in action inside of the player, and they're a little bit jumpy for this particular unit. There's no video signal when you do. It raises the needle off the disc and jumps across large sections of the surface fairly quickly. When you reach the end of a disc, the player slows down, and after a few seconds it's ready to unload and you can start watching the next side of the disc. The player is supposed to be closed when all of this is happening, but to play the other side of a disc, take the caddy and slide it back into the machine. It should release the disc. Turn the caddy over and the other side will be inserted into the machine, so you can finish the movie. The player will go through its motions and load up the rest of the film. Before I move on, I want to mention that the entire loading mechanism is driven by this belt right here, and when I first got this player it was rotted completely through. They're very easy and cheap to replace, which is a huge plus for me as far as servicing machinery goes. I mentioned a moment ago that both discs will work in both players, and this is what I mean by that. This is the back of the same player, and it hooks up through either a coaxial connection or through regular RCA terminals. For a mono player, it has only one channel of sound, but it can still accept and play stereo discs, just not with stereo sound. Even so, you can use a breakout cable like this one, and while it won't be true stereo, at least you can hear the mono channel through both speakers at the same time, which is a big advantage for stereo TVs. I should mention though that this player did have an optional add-on when it was first sold. This DIN connector in the back was able to hook up to a box that would output real stereo sound. They're exceedingly rare though, and I've never seen one on eBay. That pretty much covers players that you're going to find that weren't RCA branded. They all generally use the same stock design that are similar to the Realistic one, but RCA made a few players specifically of their own. Let's have a look at that. This is what would have been a little bit higher up the range for RCA at the time, and let's have a look. Hitting the power button opens the tray and tells you in its own kind of cryptic jargon to load the disc. It's a fairly automatic process where it will stop at this point and pull the rest of the caddy in, then release the rest of the caddy out to you and allow you to take it back while it finishes prepping the disc to play. The front of the player has up here side A and side B indicators, an indicator which comes on when it detects a stereo audio signal, and an audio A and B signal. This refers to this button down here, and on some stereo discs you are supposed to be able to select the left and right channel independently. This kind of thing works like having an SAP button on a TV. Well, not exactly, but well, one channel could be English and another channel could be French. I mean, you could have a movie soundtrack and a commentary, maybe a quiz and answer, things like that. I like this player a lot because it has an indicator. I mean, you hit pause and you can see that it's paused. You can do a faster visual search and tell immediately that you are going on to a certain part of the disc because the numbers on the dial start moving up. You can do a slower search with one of these buttons. You can even go in reverse if you need to and you still get feedback from the machine. And hitting reject also gives you feedback because it'll stop the disc dead and it will tell you to unload it. I mean, it's pretty simple to use by today's standards, but this was cutting edge for this kind of technology. I mean, it had stereo audio, visual search, which in some cases wasn't possible on a VHS tape. The machine even has random access, and if you had the remote, you could type in a number and you would end up at the specific chapter you wanted, and these are a feature that's more notable for being like on Laserdisc players or DVDs. You know what? I mean, it sounds too dry to me to just say it like that, because this thing is an absolute marvel to behold. I mean, RCA went out of their way to design this player to make using the video system that they came up with as easy as possible. Even so far to have the machine say, no, let me take that and do the rest of that for you. And to have it spit out the caddy using relays and switches and rollers and springs that aren't really working anymore because they've lost the springiness with age, and having the mechanism lower the disc onto the platter as gently as I would pet a chinchilla, and having it work the stylus delicately into position, and the fact that there's the ability to have today's equivalent of chapter markers on a disc from 1982, and to be able to listen to it in stereo, and these little tiny lights for the indicators, and these are the kinds of things that set off fireworks in my head when I come across this kind of technology, and I love everything about it. I think it's wonderful, I think it's amazing, and I think my head just exploded for a minute. So anyway, this being one of the higher end versions of RCA players, it has stereo audio through RCA jacks in the back of it, and it also has a composite video jack, but I think the audio is really the big reason these players are sought after. I mean, not a lot of lower end players had a stereo output, and even less had a composite video output, but I mean, enough of my explaining the functions of this thing. Let's see what kind of a video signal we actually get out of it. At least the idea was to show you some video footage from the device. I had a different video prepared for this section with a lot more footage, and it got copyright flagged when I uploaded it. Now, I would have made my own footage for this device if I could have, but unfortunately CED doesn't record. That being said, here is the short version. So this is some footage from a CED. I mean, it looks alright, but have a good look at some of the lines around the objects. I mean, there's a faint checkerboardy pattern on the screen that appears because of how analog video operates. An analog TV would be able to make the picture from the composite signal a little better looking, but this is what a composite video signal looks like on an HD TV. It's not always pleasant, but on a modern TV it's just made to work. And comparing it to a DVD, I mean, the color is also a lot more vivid and detailed. I mean, everything pops out at you, and you can see a whole lot more detail in the image in a DVD. But honestly, this is becoming a comparison of another thing that will win in almost every respect. So, I mean, the point is, the Selectavision is a really, really cool device, and finding something like this out in the wild is a lot of fun because watching a movie you know and love on a device you didn't know existed is a really enthralling experience, and I love exploring old technologies like this. Selectavision was a commercial flop for a lot of obvious reasons, but, I mean, it's still a really entertaining device, and I love it. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, you know what to do.